Okay, so we've hit the top of the hour. Welcome to everybody. A huge thank you to you all for joining us and giving up your precious time to be with MSAB today. This is the first part of a planned series from MSAB where we will be running a mock investigation and showing you how XAMN can help simplify the process. I will be carrying this out with mock forms and processes, etc., in a way of making it as close to real life as I can. Obviously, every country will adhere to their local policies and procedures, but I'm hoping we can all see the benefit of making a targeted approach to our investigations to improve overall efficiency. So moving on to the agenda for today. It can be seen on the slide. I'm going to start with a brief introduction about myself and the team who are helping out here today. A case summary will be provided along with arrest and submission details. Once we have reviewed the circumstances of arrest along with the submission forms, we will be looking at making an investigation plan. That leads us naturally onto the analysis. We will be taking our investigation plan and applying that to the analysis, ensuring we are targeted and efficient with our investigation. Once we have completed our analysis, we need to provide that information to the case officer so they can submit the findings ready for a prosecution decision, along with any potential intelligence we have gathered along the way. And finally, we will wrap up the webinar with details on how to take part in the challenge. And the reason you have all turned up today, of course, the prizes. So a few details about myself. I am a former serving police officer, whereby I served 15 years. I finished my career working in the digital forensics unit, where I worked computer and mobile devices. I started off in the basics, in the acquisition stages, and once I'd learned the basics, I then progressed onto more detailed analysis and attending court to give evidence. During my time within the police, I investigated computers and phones, like I said, and I also had experience with dealing with the frontline market, dealing with a kiosk rollout. Following the police, I briefly worked as a consultant in incident response and digital forensics, working on some high-profile cases, one of which involved giving evidence at one of the most famous courthouses here in the UK, the Old Bailey. So I have a good understanding of how to gather and present your evidence that you discover on digital devices and get it to portray in a way that can be understood by members of a jury. Now, my details are up on screen, so please feel free to reach out if you have any questions following this webinar or in general. I'm always happy to assist, and if I don't have the answers, I'll do my best to find them for you. Now, we do have a high number of attendees today, so a big shout out to my colleagues who will be assisting in the chat. In the chat, we have Duncan Marchbank from Global Customer Support and Greg Masterton, who is a sales engineer based in the US. The guys will try and answer the questions as we go, and if not, we will have a roundup at the end of the webinar where, time dependent, we will look to answer those questions for you live. So, moving on to the case summary. 2 arrests have been made. Both detainees have been arrested for possession with intent to supply and money laundering. In the DFU, we have received 2 mobile phone submissions, and both detainees have given a no comment interview. So both suspects are still in custody. They have been interviewed, but at this stage have given no comment interviews. A familiar story for those of you working in law enforcement, I have no doubt. Now, depending on your setup, your responsibility could just be reviewing the digital evidence, or you could be the overall case officer in charge of everything, including digital evidence, physical evidence, and around the circumstances of arrest. For an arrest like this, the evidence is far wider than just the digital evidence, so try to remember that when you plan out your investigation. Call data records will come into play, financials will be looked into, search warrants will be executed, and so much more. Obviously, once this is all compiled, the entire case can be put together. So moving on to the arrest details. We have two defendants in custody. Suspect 1 is Evanesta Pickle, and our second suspect is Ronald Reeves. Let's take a look at the arrest paperwork to familiarise ourselves with the circs of arrest. Within the paperwork, we need to remind ourselves of the offence for which our suspects have been arrested and have a look around the circumstances of the arrest. So here is a mock arrest form that's been created just to show you the sort of detail that we're going to be looking for. We can see the suspect's name, address, custody reference number, date and time of arrest, where they are arrested, the offence for which they have been arrested, and the exhibit, more importantly. So we have a Samsung S9 with the exhibit reference. And we have a co-defendant of Ronald Reeves. Reading through the circumstances offence, we can see that this subject has been picked up in a known drug dealing hotspot in a stationary vehicle. This suspect, when a police check has been carried out, reveals intelligence linking him to Class A. And when police have arrived, they've carried out a Misuse of Drugs Act search, and they have discovered a large quantity of cash and a large quantity of what is suspected to be a Class A substance underneath the driver's seat. Now, the co-defendant was detained near to the scene after driving away, and again, another search has been carried out, and the second defendant was found in possession of a large quantity of cash. So if we now load up the second defendant's, very similar details. Obviously, this time the suspect has got an iPhone 8. Very similar circumstances because obviously they're arrested together, but it gives us a good basis of what we're working towards. So moving on to the submission details. Whether you're accessing data that has been extracted from the front line or you're sat in the DFU, a submission form should have been completed. This allows the team who are extracting the data to know what is looking to be achieved, and if the extraction is lawful and justified. Let us take a look at the kind of details expected to be seen on a submission form. Again, similar details, date and time of arrest, location of arrest, the exhibit, and now we're talking bag seal numbers to ensure we have a complete chain of custody. The circumstances of arrest are present again, and we now have exhibit photographs with condition of device. And the investigating officer who has submitted these devices has filled in the points to prove. So they're seeking to establish any potential evidence to support the offence, such as chat, media files, to support drug offences or money laundering. Now, because both of these defendants have given no comment interviews, the officer in the case is also hoping to establish communications between the two defendants. PIN code of the device is not known, and they have given us some keywords to look for. And when we have a look at the second submission form, once again, very similar, exhibit photographs of the iPhone, and again, some more keywords to search on. So in summary, the investigating officer has asked us to assist with the points to prove for these offences. So we're looking to prove communication between the two suspects in order to establish a link between them. We're going to be looking for any data that is going to help prove the offence. Now, that request is slightly unhelpful as it doesn't help narrow our search. For example, another submission, we might be provided a time frame to look through, which would then help narrow our search. However, we do have some good keywords, so we have a good start. So, investigation plan. What are the points to prove? And generally, people will always ask, I want everything. We're looking for device ownership. We're looking to link our suspects. We want to target our investigation. And by targeting the investigation, we're given a proportionate response. And following with ACPO guidelines, we will document our investigation. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the phrases on the screen, either as a person requesting the examination or because you've rolled your eyes as an examiner when you've received them. Now, we utilise triage in every area of law enforcement and emergency response, and triage is, put simply, a methodical approach to determining what can be done and what the priority is once that is known. Take, for example, a scene search. Is it proportionate to bring a full search team in to cover every blade of grass, whereby you could get a drone or a helicopter to take a flyover and carry out the same search in seconds? Yes, sometimes a search that goes through each blade of grass is required, but often it would be overkill. The response must be justified and proportionate. Now, triage application to mobile forensics is not a new idea. However, the last 5 to 6 years has seen such an explosion of data and devices that there is really no choice but to define strategies, policies, and deploy solutions to manage today's challenges. As we move forward with more technology adoption as a culture and as a basic way of life, those challenges will not be less, they'll be more. I travel to police forces all over the UK and Ireland, and while a lot have already implemented some form of triage, a surprising number are still treating mobile forensics the same as conventional forensics. The take it all in and we'll get to it when we can approach is alive and well. We need to find a solution to this overload of data, allowing for filtering and a targeted approach. So your investigation can be targeted and you don't end up down the rabbit hole reviewing data that is totally irrelevant to your investigation. So on to the points to prove. We have 2 in custody, possession with intent to supply, and money laundering. To prove money laundering, we need to prove that the property is criminal property. Remember, lots of checks are going to be carried out by the investigating officer, such as looking into banking, is the cash contaminated with drugs, etc. And the list could go on and on. So all we're looking to do with the digital device is helping to add weight to the overall case. We don't always need and we won't always find the smoking gun for this offence, although of course it would be nice if we found it. For the possession with intent to supply side, to establish the knowledge of distribution and helping to prove it is not for personal use. Again, we're helping to build the case here. Search warrants at home addresses and the financial investigations will be carried out to help establish this offence. So when you build your investigation plan, it's always good to lay out what you're looking to establish. If it exists or doesn't exist, you will need to document the processes you carried out to come to your conclusion. So a little reminder of the ACPO guidelines. I'm not going to read out the slide, but we should all be aware of these principles when working with digital evidence. So when we find ourselves reviewing digital evidence, we need to be aware of ACPO Principle 3. If our evidence is reviewed by a third party, they need to understand how we've come to our conclusions. And if necessary, follow the same steps so they can validate how we come to our conclusion. So keeping an event log or audit log of the processes and steps that you carried out aligns with this principle. It will also allow you to remember what you were doing when you return to the case, months or even years later. So onto the analysis of the data. That's why we're all here today. I'm pleased to announce that I will be using the yet to be released XAMN 5.3. This is the first time MSAB has showcased the up and coming improvements to XAMN, and I must express that this is a beta build, so things may still change prior to the actual release. So we open up the case, and once again I want to explain the importance of an event log. Obviously, we've seen the ACPO Guidelines. They dictate that a third party should be able to follow and come to the same results as you. So it's best to keep a detailed log of what steps you take. I find the more detailed the better. I'm getting old, so I like to leave myself breadcrumbs to remember how to get home. This is an example of an event log where we will have basic details if our investigation's got an operation name, our DFU reference, the exhibits we are looking at, and our subjects. Now, the first part that I always like to fill in indicates what exhibits I'm working with, my version of software, and what forensic workstation I am working on. So we have two XRY files that we've loaded into XAMN, and we've created the case. We can save as we go once we make changes and work with both data sets at once to see if we can assist the investigating officer to help prove the offence. So before we start our investigation, now is time to set the scope of our investigation. I'm anticipating a lot of artifacts. With these two submissions, thankfully, the acquisition team have managed to get a physical extraction from the Samsung device, and using the power of Checkmate, we managed to get a full file system from the iOS device. So the numbers will be huge. If we don't concentrate on proving the offence for which they've been arrested, we could end up finding ourselves led down that rabbit hole I spoke about. So what we can see on screen is XAMN 5.3. And remember, if you have an XRY physical license, you will get a full XAMN license, which includes Elements, Horizon, and Spotlight. So on the front page, we have our case information, which we can collapse and expand if required. We have our data sources, which you can see I've given names to the subjects and the exhibit reference numbers. On the right-hand pane, we have the quick views that we could launch, quickly predefined filters that the team at MSAB have developed for you, or any user-created profiles. Just below that, we have categories, which are the categories that have been extracted from both of the devices. A new feature that was added recently was the breakdown of apps, and for 5.3, we've expanded this further to include recognized content. This is a great addition to include, and one of which was asked for by the community. So I'm pleased to show you that off here today. A great way of jumping straight into the relevant data for your investigation. Now, before any of you ask, there is a smart processing button at the top. I am sworn to secrecy regarding that one, so you'll have to leave the excitement of that one to come up with the release details. We have been viewing the overview page. We also have a data sources page, which shows you the exhibit details, if we've given the device a picture, and we can launch elements, view extraction log, and we can add and remove these devices from the case if required. And finally, we have the Persons tab. We will come on to Persons later. So let's start our investigation by viewing all artifacts. just the 805,000 files to deal with here. Too many to realistically search through everything. Now remember, this is just 2 modern day smartphones with average usage. Imagine having 5 to 10 or even more handsets in your case. Being able to filter and approach your investigation with direction is of the utmost importance. But of course, maybe looking through nearly 805,000 artifacts is your thing, but there must be a better way. We need to be smart, our investigation needs to be targeted, and we need to plan carefully to ensure we're dedicating our time on the right artifacts by using correct parameters. Now, we may need to adjust the time zone to reflect where the subject lives. Thankfully, these devices are relative to my time zone, but I may need to consider British summertime, for example. So to change these options, this is available at the top of the XAMN screen. And once I create a change, the artifacts will change dynamically. So first things first, I'm not happy with 805,000 artifacts. So I'm going to use the newly updated known data files library to reduce that number. I have spoken about this in the past, but I'm pleased to announce that that was recently updated, and you will find it reduces the amount of artifacts you see by an even greater amount. To do that, I went to the Known Data tab, and I have selected to exclude known data. That has now reduced the results that we're looking at to 611,000. For the quick mathematicians of you, that is a reduction of just over 194,000 files. So definitely worth applying that filter to make our lives easier. Next, I'm going to concentrate on the keywords that were submitted by the officer in the case. For exhibit SJD 031120/074, we have Ronnie, Reeves, and Ronnie spelt with IE. For the iPhone exhibit, we have Evan Esther, Pickle, and Evan. And we also have the keywords Brown, Deal, and Money that are consistent across both exhibits. Now let us start by using my favorite button within XAMN, which I call the magic briefcase button, which is here. I use this button to add and remove evidence on the fly. I'm going to start with the Android device. You can see the exhibit reference on screen. And you will also see here that the exhibits are numbered 1 and 2. Once we press OK, you will see that we've now had the artifacts taken down to 286,000. These numbers are becoming far more manageable to deal with. They're still big numbers, but they're not as scary as the original number we faced. So the first keyword was Ronnie. And you will see as I'm typing into XAMN, the pre-index is showing how it works. The word is automatically filled for me. So once we select Ronnie, we have 140 artifacts. To clear that filter, I press the Clear Filter Selection button. Now I'm going to search for Reeves. This reveals 17 hits. And if we search for Ronnie, I can see that it's not going to populate, so I'm expecting 0 results. And I'll reveal no results. So we are following ACPO guidelines. So I am now going to complete my event log. And here is one I made earlier. I've indicated on the form that I'm running the keywords over that exhibit, and these are the keywords that I'm going to be running. And when we get to it, I'm going to be running the same and different keywords over exhibit that starts Delta Mike. Here's one I carried earlier where I've pre-populated it, showing the results of the hits. Now to quickly switch exhibits, we go back to the magic briefcase button and we simply select the other exhibit. So we now have 325,000 artifacts. So our first keyword to search for was Evanescence. That has revealed 93 hits. So once we clear that again, and we could clear it here, or we can clear our search here. I'm now going to carry out the second keyword list, which is pickle. We now have 88 relevant hits. Now the other unique keyword to this exhibit was Evan. I'm not going to run that as it's contained within Evanescence. So we know we will return the same number of results. So we switch back to the event log and we record the hits on the second exhibit. We now need to carry out some keyword searches that are consistent for both exhibits. So we return to the magic briefcase button and we bring both exhibits into play. Remembering to remove our previous filter. If this is bold, it means it is in play. The keywords that were asked to be run on both devices was brown, which is drug slang within the UK. That reveals 26 hits. The next keyword is deal, which reveals 36. Our final keyword is money, which reveals 207 hits. So going back to our event log, we now record these further hits. Now, can you see a theme here? The more notes we leave, the more this will make sense when we revisit this case in 3, 6, 12 months or even further into the future. Now we can of course record case data within XAMN, but this doesn't really work when we're running keyword hits. We'll have a look at this feature later on. So this being just a reminder to really drill the importance of being provided with good keywords that are going to make your job easier. Asking to look for words such as murder, death, kill is not really thinking outside of the box. And when being asked to search for words such as run, leaves you wanting to run away from the investigation. Now, one key point to express is that a keyword hit is not always of evidential value. These words could be contained in system files and are perfectly lawful. So to use these in evidence, you need to identify the ones that are relevant to your investigation. You can, of course, use these as evidence if the numbers are exceedingly high and point towards unlawful behaviour. So going back to the submission form, we can see the offence for which they've been arrested is money laundering. So any sort of detail discussing money, transferring, hiding, etc. In regards to the possession with intent to supply, any drug discussion is going to help the officer in the case. And they were finally looking to prove device ownership. Now, I've always found that a good way to attribute ownership, I find, is by looking at SMS. This will normally involve the telephone number that is linked to that mobile device that's being used. So let's return to the briefcase button and select Exhibit 2, which is the Android. Remembering to clear our filter. To select SMS, we go down the left-hand pane and choose SMS. Now going through the SMS, we can see messages that have come in and out. Highlighting the COVID one here, it wouldn't be 2020 without one. But overall, SMS does not feature hugely on this device, which is not uncommon. With all the chat applications that we have today, people tend not to use SMS. However, a lot of these chat messages require us to use SMS. And at the top here, we have an incoming message from giffgaff, who are a mobile phone provider in the UK. Now this reveals the phone number in use for this device. The number linked to this device ends 012. So let's record this first crucial piece of evidence, which could be a link to device ownership. So we return to our event log and we indicate on our event log what we have found so that we could repeat this process. Once this telephone number has been found, we could run a subscriber check that could be carried out by the overall investigating officer. And if the number is registered to Evernester Pickle, we have our solid link. I now want to record this as evidence for my case, and I have several options to do that. I'm going to choose to create a tag. You can see that tags are in the top menu ribbon. Selecting tags shows me what tags are available and if I wanted to create a new one. I get the choice of creating the color of my wish. So we will start right at the bottom. And this operation is called Operation XAMN. Once we hit add, we can now apply that as a tag. When we create new tags, they are tied to the workstation. Now, if you're working as a team or from different locations, this isn't a problem. By clicking the hamburger, we can simply export the tags that we are using, so then other examiners can use it. This can help standardize processes across your agency. You will now see that we have tagged with Operation XAMN. You may also wish to leave an examiner note. I spoke about this earlier in regards to keyword hits. Wasn't really relevant for that, but this would be a good place to leave yourself a little reminder why this is relevant. And you'll see that I can now save my report. So I've now saved my case. So if I was to return to it, it would return in the current state it is in. We've updated the event log to say that we've found a relevant message, and we've tagged it and left ourselves an examiner note within XAMN. So we're still looking at exhibit that ends at 0744 and was the Android. So let's revisit the keyword search we used earlier. Remembering to remove any filters, because at the moment we're viewing SMS, only 15 artifacts, and our filter selection is bold. We've now returned to the number that we were looking at previously, so we can run our keyword. I'm going to look for the word Ronnie, and it takes us back down to 140 results. Now, the majority of these are being located in chat. So once we select chat view, you will see we now have a new layout as for XAMN 5.3. We can sort by newest first. Personally, I prefer to start with the highest count. We can expand these columns. And once we go into a chat, you will see that it is now represented as it would view on a user's mobile device. This allows it to be presented in an evidential package that will be easier to explain to a jury. If a jury member can view the data in a way that they can relate to, they will understand it. You can also reorder how you're presented the messages. I personally prefer oldest first. That way, it relates to how I would view that on my own mobile device. On the left-hand pane, at the moment, we're seeing the chat thread. If you were purely after media, you could change to just attachments, which then just reveals the attachments that are within that chat thread. The officer in the case was interested in communication between Ronnie Reeves and Evanesta Pickle. By selecting the chat thread between the two, it seems a good place to start. We start at the top like we would on our own mobile device, and instantly we can see we found some evidence that may be relevant. Messages are displayed underneath the sender, like they would be on your own personal phone. And as we scroll through the content of the message, we have a reference to a boss. Could that be indicative that Evanesta is working for Ronnie Reeves? And this is certainly evidence suggesting that it could be linked to drug dealing. We have maps showing locations that have been shared within WhatsApp. Now, this certainly seems like it would be relevant to the investigating officer. So I'm going to save a PDF output of that chat, which I can do just by clicking the PDF button here. That then gives us the option of where we want to save that to. And we can give that a name that's going to be of relevance. So we could start by calling it the exhibit name, so we know where the evidence has came from. And then we have options. We could put it in a zip. We could protect the document with a password. We have the option to open it after export or just open the folder. And we could also open the log file after export. Because we're going to be collecting evidence, I'm going to make myself an evidential folder. And hit export. And we'll also be presented, even though I didn't select it, I can automatically open the folder from within XAMN. That now gives me an export log and a PDF, which will contain the chat messages. Just going to rename this. So we now have our first piece of evidence. Now, I would also like to tag these messages. So to do that, I simply come to the bottom of the chat, go all the way to the top, whilst holding Shift, and I can now come to my tag, select Operation Examine, and hit OK. They are now all tagged. I could also leave myself an examiner note. Now that will have been added to every single artifact within the chat, because at the moment they are all selected. Now, we've obviously made a good start. We've ran a targeted approach. We still need to remember to include what we've just done on our event log. Now, obviously, I'd set the previous ones up so we could record this one live. The time in the UK right now is 15:41, but because I went early, I'll quickly change this one to 15:40, which of course you shouldn't do in practice. 15:41, and we're going to record the fact that we have just tagged a relevant chat between both parties from the exhibit SJD and giving it my initials. So we've now added a tag within Examine, and we've given examiner notes. So what we're going to move on to now is building a person profile for Evanesta. This will allow us to prove full device ownership and possibly reveal some more intelligence that was unknown previously. Returning to my case page, remember we went through earlier, we had overview, we had data sources, and we had persons. So this is the persons page. Now each individual in a mobile device can have several different personas. As indicated on the screen right now, there is a Viber ID. That person could also have a WhatsApp ID, a Kik ID, etc., etc. So up here we have a search box. Let's search for Evanesta Pickle. Now once we come into the Persons tab, our previous selection of the briefcase of just reviewing one of the exhibits goes out of the window, and we're now reviewing all evidence. So as we can see here, we have a Kik ID, we have an alias, and we have the name that was provided. I stated Evanesta Pickle owned exhibit that ends 0744. And you can see that XAMN is already saying, hey, I think this might be the same individual. And we can simply say, this is Evanesta Pickle. So you can see now we're building up a profile of Evanesta Pickle. Now we have some other results here. So let's click on one of those. And go in here, we can see there's a telephone number that we identified earlier. And this appears to belong to Snapchat. And we get the option to join with person. So we search for our person profile that we're building, which is Evanesta Pickle. Hit OK, and we want to keep Evanesta Pickle. So now we have even more detail in regards to our person. And you can see XAMN has now added the WhatsApp Viber ID, and we can say this is Evanesta Pickle, and it automatically removed the next person. I didn't need to search for them. Now you will have noticed when we carried out a person search for Evanesta Pickle, we got some other interesting results. Evan Nestor, an email address that's related to him. We could also pass that to the investigating officer. A subscriber check could be carried out with Google. So let's start at the top. Evan Nestor, Viber ID with a telephone number. We know that is linked to our subject, so I'm going to join that. I'm going to keep Evan Nestor Pickle, and again, we're helping to build up the profile. And you can see that this profile is becoming quite big now. So let's finish off. And our final one. And now we've resolved, so when we carry out another search for Evan, we're just getting our one result. Now you could edit the name. They may call themselves a totally different name to their actual name that on their birth certificate. So you could edit that if required. You could also assign an image to them if you have a custody record image. One more tie up and we are now fully resolved. So we have a KIC ID. We have a WhatsApp ID, a Snapchat ID, two varied Viber IDs. Obviously, it's just given the country code on the second one. And we have a Gmail ID. There is a lot of subscriber checks that could be carried out from this. Applications could be made to KIC, Snapchat, Viber, and Google. So at the beginning of the investigation, I alerted you to these quick views. We also have a quick view that we can use on our newly created person. If I click this, we will open a new tab and we are going to be filtering on Evan Nestor Pickle. Now, I did explain that when we go to the persons, it brings both exhibits back in play, and there it is, as we can see. Now, if we return to persons, I have the option to make Evan Nestor Pickle a person of interest. Once I've made Evan Nestor Pickle a person of interest, I could then tick this and it moves all irrelevant data entries. Remembering to clear our filter and returning to the main overview page. And once we've cleared our filters, we've returned to the original artifact count. So we're going to be looking at the other exhibit. I'm happy that we have enough at this stage for a decision on Evan Nestor Pickle to be charged with the offence that he was arrested for. So let's switch exhibits. Now move into the iPhone. You will see that we're now presented with the 325,000 results. Once more, let's run one of the keywords that were provided. And I'm going to run the keyword Evan Nestor. Now, we found a good place to look earlier was within chat. So let us once more return to chat. Now, we already found the chat between Evan Nestor and Ronnie earlier, which we bookmarked. And we tagged. Now, obviously, those bookmarks and tags are not being shown here because they are bookmarked and tagged on the other exhibit. Now, it can become quite confusing remembering which exhibit you are working with. And a good way to identify this is when you run over artifacts you will see the number that I referred to earlier. If I hover over these, you will see 1. On the briefcase, we were told 1 relates to exhibit ending 0751. So that is a good indicator. Another way is once you select an artifact, you are presented with what exhibit it comes from in the top right here. And a final third place is down the bottom. So let us return to the chat. And we can see that we have a telephone number for Ronnie Reeves, ending 436. So I'm going to tag the message thread. I'm going to shift and click like I did earlier, and I'm going to include an examiner note within XAMN and on my event log. So simply hitting shift at the top, all the way to the bottom, now allows me to apply a tag to the entire thread. Switching back to my event log, I'm going to record the fact that we have now found the identical chat thread on exhibit DM. And we also want to indicate that we've discovered the telephone number, which was +44, indicating it's a UK telephone number, 73 111 564 36. Once more, giving it my identification. So we can validate where XAMN is getting this information from. So let us choose a text that is sent and validate where it's come from. Now this is great for validating what data your tool is presenting to you. If I select the text, I can now right-click and it presents to open the source file. Now the source file is where XAMN has passed that data from. Once I click that, I am presented with the chat database where that information has come from. Now as we go through the tables, I'm immediately drawn to the message table. Within the message table, I can have a look until I can find text. I can now go through that chat thread and have a look and validate the message that has come out. I could also pick a timestamp, use the filter options on the right and change it to date, and I now have a date and time for that message. Again, just helping you to validate the information that XAMN is showing you. So these messages that we've tagged, if you hover over where the tag is, you are presented with an information marker from XAMN, giving you a quick tip as to what that button does. You will find that most buttons within XAMN will have that option. For example, if we hover over the text box, you are given a tip and reminder of what can be performed. Now, once more, obviously the fact that we've found this chat on the different handset, I now want to save that as a PDF into my evidential folder. And before, we'll choose the same naming convention so we don't get confused. The export is completed. We don't need to open at this time. So we have got bookmarks. We've recorded it on our event log, and we can now return to all of the artifacts that are showing for this device. Now, another great feature of chat is, like I say, I like to order by the highest count first. Show me where the meaty evidence potentially is. And we can see that we've got a kick conversation with 173 actions within it. Now, I should imagine a lot of the phones that you do out there are going to surpass that number greatly. This is just a great way of identifying the chat threads that are likely going to be of interest to you. So let's have a look through this chat. Starting at the top, which is the oldest. And straight away we can see, obviously, we're still looking at the evidence that's linked to Ronald Reeves. We can see that there's 4 participants, including Ronnie. And having a read through of this, it appears that there's more than just drugs and money laundering. Reviewing the evidence, seeing the content of the chat, will allow you to see if this evidence is going to be relevant to your case. We now have our second subject in the same chat thread. And as indicated earlier, obviously, the originating owner of the device is always going to be on the right-hand pane. I've worked for Ronnie for years, specifically in Shift and the Brown. Obviously, we discussed the smoke and gun. I would say that this is quite a good indicator of that. And we can also reveal that Ronnie is preparing to vouch for him. Now, when I hit initial tag, I was given tag number 1, which is important. If I right click, I'm then presented with the option to choose the tag. We're going to tag Operation XAMN because that is extremely relevant to our case. Now, this part of the chat is extremely indicative that Evanesta works for Ronnie. So I want to capture that. I'd like to show it, but I don't need the entire contents of this chat. We may do further down the line, but this is the data that I'm after. So within XAMN, we can use the capture option, which will allow me just to take a quick screenshot. So I'm just going to drag. And now the resolution is because I'm working on multiple screens. If you're working, once you corrected your display resolution, you would capture the area that you need. So we will hit this as save file, and we're going to save that into our evidential folder. So we have now saved that. Just bear with me. There we go. So we have now saved that, and we now have that in our evidential package. So reading through more of this thread, we could take some further screenshots. The fact that Ronnie is advising the group that he will take over, that Pickle, we assume is Evanesta Pickle, will only communicate via him. And again, this chat thread is of extreme relevance. We've now got pictures of drugs. We've had references to diamonds and further drug pictures talking about money. money sorting machines. So we are interested in our two individuals who are in custody. Remember to keep your examination targeted. It could be easy to be drawn down that rabbit hole and completely lose track of where we were running this investigation. So I'm going to now look for any further chat threads between Ronnie and Evanesta. And we have one here. So this is a kick chat between Evanesta and Ronnie. And again, just having a review where Ronnie's confirming that the bosses, and I'm assuming he's indicating the other chat, that they can be scrupulous of who they communicate with. References a boss. References to the EncroChat platform that was taken down this year. This is all solid evidence. Money is being left. That supports our money laundering. Images of drugs. Once again, helps support the offence for possession with intent to supply. Customer was happy. Again, all good evidence. So once again, let's save this to PDF. Give it a relevant name. And hit export. Once again, returning to our event log and adding some further detail. All these little breadcrumbs that you're leaving yourself, that if you ever have to come back to this investigation, you're going to remember exactly what you were doing. And again, we could tag and leave ourselves examiner notes, which I would do. So let's clear that current filter, because at the moment all we're looking at is chat artifacts. We're still just looking at the iOS device. And let's have a brief look at connections. Connections are a good way of seeing communication between different parties. If we start at the bottom, you can drag these around, and once you select an individual, you will then be presented with the details of that. So let me zoom out. So you can see what we're being shown on the right-hand side here are these numbers, and I can simply select another contact and I'm presented with their details. Now we will cover connections in a upcoming webinar in the Examine Investigate series. So returning to the overview page, we briefly looked at data sources, and I explained how you could view elements, view extraction log, and we could deactivate the source, which doesn't delete the XRY file, it just removes it from this case. Now, this exhibit is an iOS device. Now, iOS and Android, they very handily save pictures of apps in their current state on your device. So when you exit an application, a screenshot is taken. If you think of your own iPhone, or if you have knowledge, when you switch between apps, you are presented with a screenshot of each app in its current suspended state. These files are .ktx, Kilo Tango X-ray. Now let's go to Elements. Within Elements, I can run scripts, Python scripts. Now don't panic. We're not about to open a script editor and try to teach you Python in 5 minutes. This is just to show you how it can assist your investigation. My colleague Oscar has written a script that's converting the KTX files to PNG so we can view them. And you will see this is new and improved for XAMN. Previously, this used to be run. You would back out of XAMN and it would be run in XRY. Now, when we hit run script, it's all contained within XAMN. And you can see that you have a run and log file in front of you showing what the script is doing. We also have a SHA-1 of the script that we've run. Again, this is great if the evidence needs to be repeated. Now we'll leave this run. It should only take a minute. And once we've got our results, we'll have a review. So like quick view and tags, you can share Python scripts amongst your team. So I'd thoroughly recommend, if you're dealing with this sort of data every day, learning the basics of Python. It's such a great tool to use in this digital forensics world. And if you're interested in Python, the training team run a great course of advanced app analysis, whereby you will be trained the fundamentals of Python along with integrating it with XAMN and XRY. So you may be new to Python. I would suggest venturing to the MSAB forum, where we have some of the team who are really knowledgeable with regards to Python. Like I indicated, this script was created by MSAB staff member Oscar Choi. Oscar frequents that forum and shares a lot of his great work and will always help you with any issues that you come across. That should finish up in a moment. Of course, when I tested this earlier, it took about a minute. There we go, it's finished. So we can see that we've added 262 files. We started the process at 16:07 and it finished at 16:09, so just a little over 2 minutes. So once we hit open in Spotlight, that will then apply that filter of our manually mapped data and show us the results. Once we choose gallery view, we could start working our way down. And some of these application suspend states could be of relevance. The application might not have been on the device, which we looked through when we found the kick messages. So the suspend state might be of interest. For example, this one shows a suspended state from kick. So again, just showing knowledge of the chats that are in place. Now, whilst we are here, you can see that I've now started to begin having multiple tabs open. Now, I like an XAMN to work similar to an internet browser in regards to tabs. Now, before long, like Google Chrome, you will forget where you are at having. So the ability to rename these tabs will help you remember what tabs you're doing what with. And when you save the case file, like I reiterated earlier, it will reopen in the state when you last saved. So to save a tab name or to change the tab name, just double click it. And you can give it a name of relevance. So now when I switch between, and I would indicate that's because we're using a beta. I did say at the start that obviously working with a beta does come with difficulties at times. So that does work. I can assure you it works, and it is a great way to sort of keep your investigation on track. It just allows you to know what each tab is being run for. So when you're reviewing data from multiple extractions, obviously we spoke about that you could lose track of where you're at. We've covered how by hovering over the artifact, you're presented with the reference number that indicates what exhibit. We also showed how the details pane can show you details of the exhibit that it relates to, and we showed you down at the bottom of the screen you're also presented with that information. Now, we could end up doing a lot more work with the evidence we have in front of us, but that could be a wasted effort. The subjects here may go guilty, and we would have carried out a lot of work that was not required. If a defence comes in, we could then deal with it and complete that required work. So we've now got PDF saved, we've got a screenshot, and we could put this all together in an HTML report. So all evidence is in one document. So to do that, I want to bring all of my exhibits into play. So to do that, we will go back to all categories. We will bring both of our exhibits in. We don't have any filters that are running, but we have the 28 tagged items. If we just wanted to create a report that contains all 28 items, we can simply select the tag, which applies the filter, which is indicated by the bold filter selection. We know a filter is in place. And we are now presented with our 28 artifacts. So to create a report, we come up to the Report Export button. Now, when choosing HTML, we could also choose other options at the same time. If we're wanting to create multiple reports at once, this is a great way of only inputting the data once. So we're going to choose HTML. Now, the team at XAMN have worked extremely hard on improving the HTML reporting for this version. Myself and my colleagues have given input in regards to how we used to create standardized reports when we were serving law enforcement officers. We would express that we would include the same sort of information on each of our reports. We would have a cover page. We would have organization info. We could have case info. We could have report notes. For example, whenever I used to create a report, it was required that I would indicate all of my digital forensic qualifications on that report. Now, I don't want to write those every time. So now XAMN gives you the options to customize, and you could put that within your report notes, and it would save you typing them out each time. Again, with organization info, you can set all of your organization info, which will save you repeating this each and every time you create a report. We won't go through running a report today, but I just wanted to highlight that the team have been hard at work in regards to improving that for you, and hopefully it will be received greatly by yourselves. So let's return to the slides. So, like I said, we could have done a more detailed and granular search. But for the purposes of this webinar, obviously we were time dependent, we didn't do a deep dive. However, the evidence discovered and reported on, in my opinion, would help to secure a charging decision to get the individuals at court. If the evidence is argued against and a defence were offered, we can then go hex diving. We can jump into the SQL tables that haven't been passed, and we can produce a far more detailed report. But at the initial stage, it is far more efficient to keep your investigation targeted and produce a report to meet the threshold requirement to get the individuals charged to court. So the results. We have identified device ownership for both exhibits, which could be confirmed with further subscriber checks. We have chat data that helps prove the points to prove for the offences of which they've been arrested for. We have identified that Ronald Reeves was in charge of Evanesta Pickle. And we have identified the Kick chat as potentially an international group chat, and we can share those details with international agencies. So obviously, how did we do that? We found SMS data that helps prove the telephone number that was in use. Linking those up with the call data records will help us prove device ownership. We then discovered pretty damning evidence within the chat category. PDF reports created for court will assist with a charging decision. It became clear from the chat that Ronald Reeves was in charge of Evanesta, and we have documented this. And following this, we have submitted a request to Kick for identity of the participants of the international group chat of interest. Once we have those results, we can then share those with international agencies. So, on to the reason that you're all here today, prizes. Plus, MSAB needs your help. Now, the system is quick here in the UK, and I've already received some questions from the prosecution team, which I need your help in answering. So, in regards to the challenge, any questions or clarifications, please reach out to us via social media. Look for MSAB on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. You can reach out via the email addresses that will be provided at the end. And I will copy the link into the chat where you will be able to visit the site and download all of the required files to complete the challenge. You can see the website address there. And like I say, I will copy that into the chat. So when you visit that website, you're going to be presented with this screen. The questions are going to be able to be answered using our free XAMN viewer. The XRY file that we want you to review and answer questions is available to download from the site. Now, of note, we have found that some browsers are not working as expected, so please save the link as a .xry file rather than just click the link. Now, in regards to winners, the winners are going to be who complete the challenge the fastest and obviously the most correct answers. The winners will be contacted by MSAB in due course after, and we were going to have a complete review and run through of the answers at the beginning of XAMN Investigates Part 2. So here is a reminder of the details behind the XAMN Investigate series. So any questions you have relating to the webinar today or the challenge, please feel free to reach out, or like I said, contact MSAB via the social media platforms on the bottom of the screen. So that leaves me to say a huge thank you to you all for joining MSAB today and giving up your time. We hope you enjoyed the webinar of us today and that you will join us for XAMN Investigates Part 2 in the new year. Now, do we have any questions that need to be answered live?
Hey, Adam, it's Duncan.
Hey, Duncan.
I've been going through the chat. Everybody's been very well behaved throughout the presentation. Let's see if there's any good points. There's a couple questions about, in the initial point you made, you said that the iPhone was locked, and they asked, would you have to use Gray key to bypass the PIN code? So clarified that for him that yes. Yeah. The other question that came up that might be interesting for some is the way the time zone functionality works in XAMN. The time zone functionality works on the fly to change, to basically normalize time zones across multiple different extractions.
Yeah, I can quickly show that now. So if we were to apply just quickly a -5, we can obviously see the timestamps on the screen here. And as soon as we change, we can see they're instantly changed. Hope that one helps.
Yep, and the question was, what if I wanted to display two different extractions with different time zones? If you wanted to do that, you'd have to open the extractions individually in different XAMN windows and then look at those side by side. So if you're opening them in a case, the time zone filtering is going to normalize it for all extractions relative to each other. So if you had a guy in London and a guy in the United States, you would see the respective time zones for the events as they happen on the device based on whatever time zone filter you set.
Fantastic. Yeah, thankfully in the UK, we don't, obviously you guys in the States, you will deal with multiple time zones, so that can become quite challenging.
Hey Adam, it's Greg. Can you hear me?
Yeah, coming through, Greg.
Yeah, it looks like the rest of the questions have been answered in the chat, and we've also posted the link to get to the additional information they need as far as filling out the forms and giving answers.
Fantastic. Well, that leaves me to say thank you once again for all joining us. And like I said, if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the XAMN Investigates team and we'll be sure to help you. Thank you very much.